Hi everyone. So for our part number 3 from this series explaining how to approach our last assignment, our last final drawing, actually these are a couple of small drawings that you're making. The title is Tetraptych Landscape in 4 parts. And we're working for these drawings in a particular manner using soft pastels. So the previous 2 parts that relate to how to approach that final assignment, they were about how to prepare materials. We were explaining the usage of materials, paper, soft pastels, blenders, as well as you had ideas given for how to think of the landscape, how to think of how to capture what is the most exciting in the landscape, to find how to think about this compositionally whenever you go out there and you're trying to capture something really unique for your drawing. And now in this part, we're going over several different examples. These are parts of demonstrations, also finished works or works made by students in my previous classes. There will be also a demonstration in the second half of the entire PowerPoint where I'm explaining image by image. I'm going through the process of creating a small drawing similar to one of those 4 drawings that you're going to create for this assignment. So this is our little introduction to the entire PowerPoint, and this is the voice over the PowerPoint. So there's no video component here, but definitely it's being animated, and there's my voice that will guide you through this PowerPoint. Okay, let's start. So in the beginning, I thought it might be quite interesting to you to see what we can do. How can we work successfully with soft pastels whenever we have a small amount of colors available to us. And in our previous classes, we had this situation where we had only 12 sets of soft pastel sticks. 12 sets in terms of, in the world of soft pastels or pastels overall, it's quite drastically limited. Limited amount of colors or hues that you can work with, and just remember that this is not colored pencil. Colored pencil is transparent. You can layer colored pencil and you can achieve variety of different hues, different colors. Here, on the other hand, this material is so different. Soft pastel is opaque. Okay, so there's pigment and binder. The pigment is pretty in quite a strong amount or greater amount, but also the binder is opaque. So anyway, I'm not sure if I explained this well, but the idea is just remember that this type of medium is opaque and it behaves differently. And since this is opaque, you have limited ability to create more colors. Okay, and there is very specific hues. If you don't have that pigment, it's it's really limiting you. So, but there are ways to go around this. It's a little bit harder, but then you very closely think about the interaction of colors, and you sometimes emphasize colors, or you use colors in juxtapositions that are sometimes surprising, like there are those violets showing in areas that you would think you wouldn't have them. Just because they are close to yellows, then there is this complement that is emphasized, and that can create additional color effect. So here in this type of drawings, you have to really think about the interaction of colors. So it's harder. You can see that in those some of the cast shadows, there are some blues, violets, very, very strong colors mixed in. So this gives you an idea how vibrantly you can work with this type of medium, even in or especially in these kind of small studies that show you a limited palette to work with. Okay, let's move on. So this is, on the other hand, fully developed drawing in a little bit more expanded amount of colors. So here we're using 24 stick set, and this is, or 25, 24, it's pretty good range for what we're doing right now. And you have these sets, and I require these sets, this amount of colors for what we're trying to do here. And of course, you're still thinking about the interaction of color. You're still seeing some beautifully brought out or accent-like colors that you would think you would never put them there. And they are also adding a really beautiful vibrancy to this drawing. Overall, you can see that the colors, if the set you bought from a reputable brand, I would say this is a good quality set of good quality pastels, then you should expect that the color brilliance is incredible. And this is, in this drawing, you can see that there are some really beautiful pure colors that I'm getting to in areas that they are exposed to light, and the plastic containers especially, they have very vibrant, strong colors, and they can be really beautifully described in this technique. Okay. And then I thought it might be interesting to you to see a version or a couple of slides I just added here where you can see the beginning of the drawing. So now, you have a very roughly suggested shapes and their colors. And so this is what often you're going to do. This can be called also underpainting. Underpainting in soft pastel technique can be done in two different ways. It can be applied with just soft pastel broadly with a broad side of the stick, very simply blocking the shapes in color, in simple colors that we perceive right away. So these would be those inherent colors inherent to that particular object that we are observing. So colors that are local colors. So blue is that container or that box here. So we're starting with blue, and we're suggesting also, and I'm including a little bit of black or a different darker color that I very quickly apply, and I don't even blend, just to show that, oh, it's darker, oh, it's lighter. But overall, there are some lines. Yes, you need to start with a sketch. There are lines that suggest the ends or the borders of the shapes, and their colors, respective colors, local colors, and it's just very sketchily done. And then you see, here we go. This is a drawing that is farther in the development or almost about to be finished. And then you see how much more blending went into it, how many more, much more richer shapes have been developed. And you can see also some reflections that are caught nicely, beautifully created. You see some different colors that are being seen through, just because there are a couple of techniques you already know, such as scumbling, or scumbling, side stroking, but feathering, where you can allow these effects to come out, where there are 2 or 3 colors visible. But this is how you can refine that initial sketch by using all these techniques. Okay, let's go to the next. And then you see here the comparison of the beginning of the very crude or raw beginning of this drawing and then the end. Right, and here is a mix of parts or shapes, especially these shapes in the foreground and middle ground. They are much more developed or almost finished, and they are in stark contrast to shapes in the background that the student hasn't yet had a chance to get to work on more beyond that initial sketch and initial underpainting or blocking in local colors. So there is the cap that is just applied, pastel material is applied there, and it's a little bit smudged, so there are some makeup applicators that we often use to just initially distribute or blend in that local color just initially. And then you see that these shapes are so much more developed. They are certainly more three-dimensional, more substantial looking, like they have body, yes, and these are flat ghosts behind. So you can see that difference. It's quite interesting in this drawing. And then this is one of the finished drawings on one of the still lifes that I showed earlier. It's a different view, a different drawing by a different student, but it's also considered finished. What do I mean by that? So there are parts that you see closer to the edges of the picture plane, of the paper, and the corners. You start seeing that there's less and less of the material applied or worked on, less blended, and we start seeing more and more of the toned paper. And the paper, the tone of the paper, you can see that it's somewhat brownish, beige, dark beige. So yeah, this is something that we often would like to be able to see. And the toned paper, even if it shows in some gaps, in some areas in the middle of the picture plane, that's also fine, and it often adds a little bit more interest to your drawing. So this often happens in soft pastel drawings. Okay, and then you see here, this is something that relates a little bit more to our idea of landscape or airplane drawing, going outside and drawing what is out there. This is, of course, the fragment of our campus. So we often go to, and normally we would probably go possibly to the front lawn and draw the campus buildings surrounded by greenery, in this case palm trees and other trees. So this is also to show you the beginning of this type of drawing. So you see a lot of lines, contour lines, basically sketch lines, gestural lines that are initial sketch of everything that is out there and that you want to capture, and then some colors that are being applied and distributed with makeup applicators or other blenders, excuse me. And here is a finished version of this type of drawing. So now you see that it's finished, but you still see that there are some loose parts. We see even the toned paper in some of the areas. We can see toned paper is one of the layers, and sometimes we can see through, even in the sky. But also you see some very loose parts in parts of the picture. You know, these are very tight and pronounced shapes of with even line or hatching shapes of palm trees, because they are quite important. They are in front of the building, and then parts of the building, the elevation, especially those in shaded areas, are just very sketchily drawn, and they are not always fully blended. So I encourage you to have this quality of, I wouldn't say unfinished quality of drawing, because we consider this entire drawing finished. We just want to loosen up. So we don't want to have extremely tight shapes so it looks pretty. We want to have a vibrant drawing consisting of some parts that are looser than other parts that need to be tighter. Okay, and then here we have two different versions of different landscapes. This is more like a sketch that was drawn on a small piece of paper, toned paper, so the texture is pretty pronounced. And it was just one of the trips, kayak trips to one of the Florida Springs nearby. But these are examples of en plein air, and these type of drawings are completely fine to do easily out there, outside. Okay, and now let's move to our demonstration of how to use soft pastel for your assignment. So from the very beginning to the very end. So the very beginning is just to choose the area that you're interested in. I showed you earlier in part number 1 or 2, I believe it was part 1, where I'm going through a set of images. If you go outside and you want to draw directly in plein air, directly from the view, that's even better, but just be very, very conscious about the composition. So in this situation, I thought, okay, well, it's pretty plain. All the greens are almost the same. There's not so much happening, but I see it's promising to make it even more vibrant once I start working pastels. So I felt there's quite a bit of potential, because we have in the foreground this beautiful light green bush-like or small tree. Then we have beautiful cast shadows, so I emphasize it's extremely important. It will really, really help to make your drawing more realistic, more vibrant if you work with cast shadows coming from sunlight. You know, drawing under strong sunlight. Afternoon sunlight is great. You just want to be able to capture really beautiful long cast shadows underneath those trees. And this is the situation that I have here. So I have this foreground pretty clearly separated from the middle ground and background. So in the background, in the middle ground, well, we have some sticking out here portion of the another tree. It's already different in quality, and it's in a different spot. It's above this small light green tree, and then of course in darker greens. And then we have in darker greens some other trees in the back, and we have some cascading like shapes. So going up, cascading down. We have even a little bit of the building, and it adds a little bit of a difference, some variety, because it's in the reds, that roof there, and something a little bit different structurally. It's not like all those organic shapes here. And then we have these shooting vertically beautiful large, big trees. above. And then we have quite a bit of sky, and we want to have quite a bit of that sky in our drawings. Okay, so this is the very start. Very, very different in terms of colors that I'm capturing. And I actually encourage you for landscape drawing to experiment and to look for in the very initial stage, when you're just applying rolly, very crudely and in a raw way that material, find colors that are actually opposite to your greens, opposite to the colors that you perceive in that landscape. And you see that it will have incredibly beautiful effect. It will come through in a couple of spots, especially if you don't have a toned paper. This is what you would like to do. You would like to create your underpainting for landscape drawings. Try that. It will always add a lot of vibrancy to your images if you start actually with complementary colors or some colors that are in temperature different to the dominant colors in that landscape. So we usually have greens, the sky is blue. How about we add some pinks or oranges to the entire scenery? And that's what I did here. The texture is pretty strong. It could stay like this, and I could just go with a makeup applicator or any other blender and blend all of that. Or I decided here to use isopropyl alcohol. You can use also water instead of isopropyl alcohol. So this will be wet underpainting for soft pastel drawing. So it's basically we kind of go a little bit more into the area of painting, pastel painting than pastel drawing. It doesn't matter. You can use both terms are appropriate here. But I decided to just use a little bit of isopropyl alcohol and use my old brushes. Flat brushes are great to just distribute or blend that those colors, the pigment on the paper, or mix with isopropyl alcohol. So this is how it looks, and it's very freely, it's very quick, it's just smudging all over, just making sure that I'm the shape's completely not disappearing, and so to some degree I'm just making sure that it's not completely all dissolving into one muddy color, but I'm preserving the borders of shapes to some degree, but it's very freely done. Okay, this is my underpainting. And now this is to show you my setup. And many of you will have the situation when you cannot draw outside. Then you took really good pictures, you chose your composition, your best picture, and then I encourage you to draw from a bigger screen. I mean, basically your phone screen is just impossible to draw from. It's too small. So here, this is iPad. It's manageable size. Okay, so here's my 24 set of half sticks. Beautiful colors in this set. And then I'm just having this piece of paper flatly put on the table. And then you start seeing that I'm adding some greens, finally. Once I added several different colors, I start blending them a little bit, and it all start playing together with that underpainting underneath. So some of the color from underpainting will be always in a few spots visible, and it will stay there maybe to the end, possibly. So that there's this inherent interaction between underpainting colors and the colors that I observe in the landscape, and I layer them upon that underpainting colors, and there's of course interaction that happens between these different colors or variety of them. And you also see that I start with very dark shapes first. And this is always the order in soft pastels. All the lightest values, more intense bright colors will be added at the end on top because it's soft pastel and it's opaque. So you work differently or opposite way to whatever you are working in colored pencils. Okay, I decided to work a little bit on on the sky, and sky is one of the lightest shapes. And I kind of added gray there in preparation for adding blue later. Here I'm adding blue because I was thinking, well, I have to mix that blue. That blue is not the sky blue that I'm seeing, so I will have to mix this with gray. And then I have also that underpainting that is in beautiful pink. So it will all create, I thought, interesting mixture. And it's really more like going by error and trial and experimenting and thinking more or less what can happen. And I don't be afraid to be wrong, because I know that since this is soft pastel, it's very easy to fix things, to change, to remove, because it's always that loose powder that you're working with, and it's opaque, so it's not a colored pencil. Here, once you make an error, you can cover this up very easily with another opaque color. So don't be afraid, experiment. And now I go over and I mix all of that with the wedge-like blender, makeup blender. Okay, so now let's go on and let's add more greens into the trees on the back. So I'm working on the back because these are darker shapes, and since we work from dark to light, it seemed more appropriate to work more on those trees on the back. And you see there's a very raw, cool green that I applied, and now I'm blending some of that. Some of that I don't, because I want to have a little bit of the texture of leaf-like group of leaves, you know, in the and sticks in between. So I partially blend, but not too much. And then I'm adding some violets, some dark blues, of course, to add a little bit more cool temperature, and also some dark areas to create in those greens. And I mix partially it in. And then I start adding, I felt that was a moment when I can actually address middle and foreground and just start adding lighter greens to that little tree. I add more, and I'm mixing two different light greens. I also began addressing the lawn and work with those warmer and lighter greens around the cast shadows that are cast by that little tree in the middle. I'm adding some yellow with a side stroke, but it's really more scumbling that I'm doing here. So I'm using the side of the stick. I'm applying it in such a way that I'm moving or drawing over the surface. I'm moving that stick, so it leaves the trace of the color in such a manner that we can see it's like a translucent kind of quality that it's got. So we see whatever happened before all those layers of greens underneath and underpainting. So this is scumbling, yes, where we apply an addition color of color on top, but we don't really blend it. So you have this kind of textured surface and rich in color, because there's a variety of colors that you achieve in that area. And of course, this way I'm also warming up a little bit my foreground, and that foreground then, of course, is foregrounded and more emphasized, and that way I build the space in my little drawing. And then I'm working a little bit more on sharpening or creating a little bit of sharper, more realistic detail in the front by emphasizing with some dark, even black colors, those sticks or trunks, thin trunks of that little tree. And then basically this is the end. I came back to some other areas earlier, to the sky a couple of times, and I applied thickly. At the end, when you're emphasizing all the last layers that are the lightest, the brightest, they need to be applied thickly, and best if you basically don't touch them to smudge, to move around. You just don't want to blend them. So it's very, very important, and I will emphasize this again. I did this here. I literally didn't touch a lot of these greens that were applied on top, these whites in the background. Anything that is bright and light, this is applied in a raw manner, and I didn't blend this. Only cast shadows, all darker values are to some degree blended or completely blended. They can be flat. They should be always flat. But everything that is light and bright and intense needs to be emphasized in terms of volume, and is being applied thickly, like in pastels, in oil painting, and it's not being stretched, it's not being blended ever. That's a very, very important thing to always do in your soft pastel drawings or paintings. And now here are a couple of details to show you that effect of very thickly unblended applied light colors. You can see there are some squiggly lines, some hatch lines, some interesting little spiky like shapes that I'm adding just to create the whole illusion of that shape of a lot of leaves. Yes, so I'm not counting a leaf, I'm just trying or devising something that would emulate some type of texture that would emulate, or type of lines or squiggly lines that would emulate that effect that I see in nature. This is the trees on the back. So there's also still quite a bit of texture, and I added some light spikes as well. And so some of that is blended, some of that not. You've seen also the sky was pretty nicely scumbled. And this is the finished piece. Okay, so there's a lot of looseness still, and it's extremely important in your landscape drawing to have a lot of that loose quality. A little bit of tightness, yes. And you see how that underpainting in pinks beautifully comes through in some areas. And some toned papers here and there is still visible. So this is how we came along from this very, very beginning, crude beginning, all the way to this beautifully finished, vibrant drawing that is reflection of my experience in this landscape. And this is just to show you how you can create a much more interesting drawing and scenery and make your piece really much more interesting than even the place itself or the photograph that you took. So this is the strength of art that you can create. So yeah, thank you. And I hope that's very inspiring and it gives you an idea how to work with soft pastels. This particular assignment or project, but also any other soft pastel, especially soft pastel outside or in plein air. Thanks.